Revolution House in Old Whittington near Chesterfield. Now we think that Revolution House was built sometime in the 16th century, the 1500s, and originally it was a long farmhouse dwelling. One of the reasons we know this is that we have a squeezer door. Now a squeezer door would have separated the living quarters of the family from where the animals were kept. And it would have stopped the animals from getting through into the family's room. But in those cold winter months, they could have benefited from the heat coming through, although it would have been quite smelly. Now, in the 17th century, we think that the building became an inn. Now, that was because this was the dwelling of a tippler, a person who made beer and brewed beer. We think it might have been a side venture of the original farmhouse. But then, because it was on the crossroads between Rotherham, Sheffield and Chesterfield, many people stopped here to take a rest and a drink. So at that point it became an inn, which became known as the Cock and Pienet. Pienet is the old Derbyshire word for magpie. This is the main room of Revolution House, and it's furnished as it would have been in the 17th century. So in the middle we have a large oak trestle table with pewter, crockery, plates, tankards on top, as it might have been when it was an inn. Over here on the sideboard we have some examples of rushnips. In the 17th century, candles would have been very expensive and only for the richest or wealthiest of families. Rushnips were very cheap because you just took a rush, dipped it in animal fat, let it dry and then set it alight with a spark, and it would produce quite a lot of light. Here by the fire we also have the salt cupboard. Now in the 17th century there were no refrigerators, so the best way of preserving things like meat was to salt it. The salt cupboard is kept by the fire to make sure that the salt was kept nice and dry, and it would also be lockable because salt was fairly expensive. Over here we have another cupboard which was for another expensive item. This cupboard is called a spice cupboard. It was lockable and it was for spices. Things like cinnamon, nutmeg, pepper were very expensive in the 17th century, and if you had them, you wanted to keep them locked away. More recently, we've been able to confirm that what we thought were witch marks are witch marks. They're here, just above the fireplace, and they're formed from an M and a shape that looks like a W. The W is in fact two V's that stand for Virgin of Virgins. Witch marks really were to prevent evil coming into the house. And because it was a public house, because it was an inn, we think that people maybe put them above the fireplace to protect the building from evil spirits. And finally, in this area of Revolution House, we have our replica of the famous plotting chair. This chair is called the plotting chair because of its relation to what happened in the 1688 revolution. Continued as a public house throughout the 18th century. In the 19th century it was rented out to local families, but by the early 20th century it had deteriorated quite significantly. So by the 1930s, the local council, which at that time was called Chesterfield Corporation, took on the building and in 1938 opened it as a public museum. To find out more about Revolution House, you can go to the museum's website, or you can contact the museum to inquire about group or school visits to the building.